Hi, I'm Baragon13 and have the ultimate pleasure today of talking to Yair Ben-Dor, the head writer of We Create Stuff, and the head writer of In Sound Mind, which is what we're here to talk about today. Yair, thank you so much for agreeing to speak with me.
Thank you for having me. This is a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I know that you just finished off your recent run of the play Prayer for the French Republic. You're recovering from that, I hope, reasonably well.
Reasonably well. I have entertainment to keep me company when I'm not acting. So
Yeah, that's good. Before we start talking about the game specifically, can you talk a little bit about like your history with gaming and like did you grow up with it? How did you get into writing for this sort of thing? Your history with Recreate Stuff.
So it's a multifaceted story. Well, first of all, gaming has always been a part of my life. I mean, I was given the NES pretty early. I mean, I was born in '89, and I was playing Nintendo games the moment I could.
Mm-hmm.
From the Nintendo to the Super Nintendo, from the Super Nintendo to the PlayStation.
Okay.
And that was my last console.
Okay.
And then I graduated to PC gaming, and I never went back.
Never went back.
I have appreciation for the consoles, but PCs for me. And then We Create Stuff. So I know most of the devs from high school.
From high school,
because we grew up in the same town in Israel.
Right.
But they were already programming stuff back then too. I mean, We Create Stuff got its beginnings with like Portal, the Flash version, and Nightmare House, right?
Okay.
And Nightmare House was a huge mod for Half-Life 2 that it was giant. It has a huge following still. I wasn't with them back then.
Mm-hmm.
I joined We Create Stuff after they started working on In Sound Mind.
Okay,
actually.
all right.
So they started with and writing for them was Sam Haft, who's the other half of Living Tombstone.
Right.
And eventually, after a while, Sam couldn't continue working on the game, so I took over and sort of continued with the base that he had built, and with the help of an additional writer called Daniel Kane, together we wrote what is In Sound Mind, the story.
Right.
So we worked on In Sound Mind for like 3 years in total, and it was amazing. It was amazing.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was the genesis of it? So you said that there was another writer who started it off.
Right.
Like, was there a design doc? Did the developers go in with a specific?
There was
mindset?
the idea of the game, the overall idea of we're gonna play a therapist. He's gonna deal with monsters and demons. That was there.
Okay.
And what I was handed when I joined the team was the town's history, the names of the characters, and what their ailments were back then, because things were changed since then a million times.
Right.
And how many monsters we're gonna have, and the basic layout of the game. Now, when I joined In Sound Mind, it was still supposed to be in a non-linear open world game, horror game,
Right.
and so many things have changed, and we'd had to overhaul the whole idea of the game and the story several times.
Okay.
So even though there were a few times where we were like, scratch everything, we have to start from the beginning, a lot of the base writing was still there, and we stuck to a lot of the ideas that we wanted to.
Okay.
So, for instance, some of the characters' names were there already. I didn't change them. There was a lot of stuff I didn't feel like I needed to change because it was great. Sam did a phenomenal job when he handed it over to me.
Cool.
And then I took over, and then there was a million things that were done and were changed before I got Daniel Kane to come in and help me. Because I needed help. There was so much to do in so little time. And things were changing. We went from having 10 different 10 monsters in the game.
Oh, wow.
10
cut
bosses.
down that much. Wow. Okay.
Cut down to, I think it went from 10 to 8 to 5 to 4.
Mm-hmm.
And I needed to, every time we cut the story down, I needed to fit the story into less chapters.
Interesting. Yeah, because I mean, you still had that huge.
Yeah, because it was a
overarching
huge
plot
thing,
and
right?
conspiracy and all that.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of reasons behind why the game ends the way it does, and teases what comes next maybe and stuff, and that's part of it, is because we had originally this gigantic thing that was very ambitious of us, and we had to just kind of squeeze it down to 10 to 12 hours of gameplay.
I mean, I have to say, going from an open world design to something that's more of like showcase levels for each of the patients, that's a really impressive pivot, just in how it ended up.
Right.
Because like every level is so specific, like at least I thought was so specifically like that patient's level, like because of their themes, and I mean, even just, I know the color scheme and the graphics are kind of the same, but they all have their own distinct flavor and feel. So,
right.
So that's really cool that you were able to kind of make that transition successfully.
I have people in We Create Stuff that are way more talented than I am and more experienced and knew what they were doing. Our lead game designer, Chen Machulski, he's a wizard. I don't know how he did it. I mean, I still have somewhere the maps of the open world, like the town you were supposed to be able to walk around it and all this stuff. To go from that, to this linear story, it was tough. It took us months to figure out how to do it. But eventually, through trial and error, we got it down to a size pill that you can swallow.
Well, so that leads to a question that I really wanted to talk about, which is kind of the backstory of the town and all the characters. And so clearly there's a lot more people and patients that we didn't end up seeing.
Right.
So how much work was done on just like, oh, this is this town, it's in this place, this is the kind of town that it's in. Like how much backstory do you have? Like is there reams and reams of it, or?
There's not reams and reams, but there's reams. There's a lot of stuff that we didn't end up using, that didn't get implemented. Stuff that was written, even as a base just for. Okay, here's the thing. If this was an open world game, I'd have the space to put all that reams of information in.
Right.
I'd have literally the physical space. There's a whole town to put lore in.
Exactly.
But once we transitioned into more of a linear story and there was less space, there was things that were taken out. And so the lore of the town became less important and is not really in there as much as the individual patients, because the story really became about the patients.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that we did rather successfully, is tell a story where you really connect with the people. It's not so much about where you are. Also, we tried to keep things as vague as we could in the beginning for it to be just kind of like any town USA.
Right.
But as things progressed and got a little more complicated too, we had to make certain decisions as to kind of where it is, kind of who these people are, what time it is, what war we're talking about. We try to be vague about stuff, but mostly successfully.
Yeah. What kind of thinking went into some of the specifics of like the time and the place? Because, you're still a little vague about certain things, but I feel like I remember eventually settling it was like the mid 90s.
Yeah, it's kind of mid to late 90s. And part of the reason we wanted to do that is because we're all 90s kids.
Right.
And so we grew up playing the 90s and early 2000s games too. And Insound Mind was built to feel like an early 2000s FPS.
Okay.
Kind of. Like, like Half-Life is a huge inspiration, right? It's kind of meant to feel like an old school game. And as such, we didn't want it to be the story to take place in modern times. We wanted it to feel like something from our childhood. Mm-hmm. So cassette tapes and lack of cell phones. The music is a different thing because we have Tombstone in it, but he took a lot of inspiration from that too. Basically, we just wanted to kind of tap into our own, things that we hold sacred from our childhoods.
Right.
And it was therapy for us too. So.
You mentioned Half-Life. What are some of the other inspirations that you have? I mean, I personally, like, I felt some echoings of Alan Wake.
Sure.
You know, like some Twin Peaks is in there.
Yes,
X-Files,
all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So I think one of their reviewers said something which was great, and it was as if an episode of X-Files and Twin Peaks happened simultaneously would be our game. All of those things are true. Half-Life was a huge inspiration, but also, like, you know, horror games, but not even just like horror games like Fear and Soma, but also just like narrative games like Undertale.
Okay.
And I mean, look, every single person in the dev team, we don't all play the same games, and we all take inspiration from other games. Alan Wake, it's really funny because I didn't play Alan Wake until well after writing chapter 2.
Wow. Okay.
And that's Alan's chapter.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of similarities in there that I swear this is true. I haven't played Alan Wake until after we built that level. And then I played Alan Wake and I was like, "Oh no. What the like, I'm going to get in so much trouble and people going to and then I made a decision. I was like, I'm not changing anything. I don't care. And it's probably because the people who created Alan Wake took inspiration from things very similar to us.
Sure.
I'm sure they're probably around the same ages as we are too.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's really funny.
Yeah. Yeah. It was like not seeing Jacob's Ladder until after writing chapter 4 too.
Oh yeah.
Like there's a lot of like cool things that once we saw them, we're like, that's cool. It's kind of close. Not gonna change it because it's cool.
Yeah.
And then, so that's why we chose the 90s thing, but also just the aesthetics. I feel like the aesthetics of the 90s was something that we were all just really kind of drawn to.
I know that there's been a lot of nostalgia for the 80s in media recently.
Sure.
And do you think it's time for like 90s stuff to start making its...
Oh yeah, absolutely. You see it everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, you see it everywhere happening. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they're remaking French Prince, right? So, did I say French Prince? I meant Fresh Prince.
Yes.
There you go.
So, let's cover the elephant in the room.
Mm-hmm.
COVID. How did that impact the development of the game?
Wow. COVID was actually kind of, I wouldn't say good for us, but it was interesting because the video game industry boomed.
Yeah.
Everyone was home. Everyone was playing video games. For me, it gave me the time to write. And for the whole team, really. I mean, we all were at home. And the game kept me sane because I had an artistic outlet.
Yeah.
I was writing the game every day, and we were playing the game which was in development, and it was clunky and it was crashing and it was awful, but we would just play it again and again and find places for notes and rewrite and do revisions and watch a movie, read a book, just gain inspiration from everywhere that we possibly could. And doing therapy. And I'm not joking, because so much of my own therapy that I did over COVID was put into the writing of the story.
Yeah.
I don't think the game would have looked the same at all if it weren't for COVID.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
That sense of loneliness and isolation that we were all feeling fed directly into the writing.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thinking back to those days of forced isolation and all that, that very much makes sense. And
I wasn't bored for a second though during COVID. Are you kidding? I mean, I had all this work, plus, I mean, an endless well of entertainment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I definitely remember being like, well, COVID's happening. Doom Eternal just came out. Let's spend some time, and it just kind of spiraled from there.
Yeah. There you go. Talk about inspiration. I mean, Doom. Great.
I know. So then let's, because you brought it up, let's transition to talking about like the therapy aspects.
Sure.
So, I mean, you did your own therapy. How much other research went into
Tons.
like specific the specific mental issues that you ended up dealing with with the characters?
So part of the whole nostalgia 90s early 2000s thing was that so many games that we grew up on tackled mental illness but didn't do a very good job representing them. This idea that people who, if you, a mental institution is a great backdrop for a horror situation,
For sure.
right? But you're implying that people in the mental institution are dangerous, are violent, and that you should fear them. And this was seen time and time again in all media that we grew up in.
And even if it's not the patients, it's the doctors.
Exactly.
Experiments that then lead to the patients becoming dangerous.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the things that when I came on board to We Create Stuff, and I was like, we're making a game about mental illness, I was like, this has to be done in a certain way.
For sure.
And that was my number one mission from day one. So from day one, I did an insane amount of research into every ailment that we talk about in the game. And when we couldn't find a way to do it right, we rewrote it and changed it. It was very important to approach every single patient with the respect that they deserve and to treat them as humans, and to actually, and this is in the game, to separate the person from their ailment.
Right.
The person and the monster are not the same.
Exactly.
They you're learning to empathize and really listen to your characters, and so even though you're sort of battling this monster for a whole level, at the end of it, you're like, oh, he's just a person who's just going through something. It wasn't his fault. This was a representation of the ailment and not him.
Yeah.
So it can get a little complicated, but it was totally worth it because we made a game about mental illness that doesn't victim blame, that doesn't cast people who seek mental help as monsters, but rather as functioning people in society that you see everywhere. And one of the takeaways, for me at least, was everyone around us is going through something. Everyone, and every single person out on the street has their own demons and monsters following them around.
No.
And we just don't know.
No. I mean, therapy works, kids.
Therapy is phenomenal.
It really is. Well, I mean, that's really cool that I mean, I saw the attention to detail in terms of the characters and viewing their struggles as, you know, at first it's like, oh yeah, they're monstrous, but then you get the more personal revelations, and you get that they're people. So that, I mean, clearly that work.
Yes, we also had actual psychologists.
So one of the things that I picked up on as I played through the game was the fact that there are a lot of seeds dropped for later chapters, or, you know, the kind of the governmental conspiracy part of things. How did you go about planning that out and balancing how much information to give when?
That's a very good question. We were doing that right up until release.
Okay.
We were still doing that sort of information, a balance in how much information we give the player, because again, we went from having a story that was supposed to fit 10 chapters down to 4.
Right.
And that was a huge undertaking. And it was tough, and a lot of stuff was cut out. And we had to decide what information is important to the story and what is not. And right up until the very end, we said there's too much information here, and we made decisions to make intentional plot holes.
Okay.
Which means that there's just enough information for you to get a sense of the story, and a lot of stuff that is intentionally unexplained because we wanted people to theorize, but because it can be explained in a later time.
Right.
If we ever get the opportunity to write a continuation to In Sound Mind, a lot of information will be. There's a lot of stuff that maybe previously didn't make sense but I think we did a really good job in the sense that like things do make sense in the grand scheme. If you're it's a psychological horror. There's a lot of sci-fi elements too. There's a lot of suspension of disbelief. There's it's not perfect science, kids. But I think we do okay, and a lot of the intentional plot holes are very much intentional.
Okay.
Some things you're not meant to know. It's kind of like if we are uncovering an actual government conspiracy in our actual world, right? You're not gonna get 100% of the information, right?
Yeah.
Even if you really do your research, there's gonna be a lot of plot holes, and you can theorize and you can try and fill the holes as best you can with educated guesses, but you're not going to get all of it. And that's sort of what we wanted that to happen. We're dealing with a government conspiracy here. You're not going to get all the information.
Right.
Yeah.
I know that sense of ambiguity is pretty key to horror in general.
Sure.
A lot of my favorite Lovecraft stories are when he hints at the monster as opposed to describing it outright. What was the tension of having these monsters that you fought against that had to be kind of made very solid and like this is actually what it is, and balance that with that sense of trying to keep on to the ambiguity and the sense of not knowing what's going on?
I mean, the monsters are introduced to you almost at the beginning of every level.
Exactly.
But not knowing what they're capable of right away, why they're doing what they're doing, and how to solve it. That's the sort of in the beginning, every introduction of the monster makes you feel helpless against it.
Right.
I think that really lends into the horror of the whole aspect. I mean, the monsters they make themselves known to you at the beginning, and then they're there throughout the whole level, and you just have to keep... And the more you learn, the more you progress through the story, you learn about them, why they look the way they look,
Exactly.
What they're capable of doing, and how to defeat them at the end. And so what starts off as horror turns into adventure.
Exactly, yeah.
That's, I think, what the charm of what we have is that we created a psychological horror game that doesn't rely on the same sort of horror structures that people are used to.
Yeah.
A lot of people will argue that our game is less of a horror and more of a spooky adventure game, but horror is very much in not knowing, is in the unknown.
Yeah.
And I think we have a great deal of that. That even though you get more powerful and you understand the mechanics of the game, every level introduces new mechanics too, and so it's like we're always sort of like taking 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and so this overall ambiguity, this sense of unease and tension, that's where the horror creeps in.
I definitely think one of my favorite moments is after you've been to the Home of Mart and dealt with Virginia, and you're like, okay, I think I have a sense of what this is, and then you're on a beach, and the lighthouse just swooshes around, and you see the trees going down,
Mm-hmm.
and like, I really, really enjoyed that sense of like, oh, maybe I don't quite know.
Yeah, oh, this is going to be completely different.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. From going into, like, being this claustrophobic, like, one building level that you've already spent, like, an hour in, to then go to something that looks like it's going to be completely open. And, yeah, absolutely. And we tried to do that with every level.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly was impressed by how much the scope grew with each one,
Mm-hmm.
and I could see, like, had the game remained open world, like you making it to each individual area, like you could have connected it through the train tracks that have been blown up and all that stuff. So
and they do.
Yeah.
Meaning, like, there's a file somewhere where there's the whole town was mapped out.
Uh-huh.
And it might not actually reflect that anymore because it's an old file from really. But we tried to make sense of it. So, if the train tracks go from the wharf and take a right turn, that's how it was in this original map.
Yeah.
I mean, and those tracks were supposed to lead you right through, by the outskirts of the town, right into the Meyer Pharmaceutical building. Like, it was all mapped out.
Yeah, and so that's really cool because that also, I mean, you talked about some subversion of tropes. That's something that I was really, really interested in as I went through, because you have, I mean, the horror trope of the spooky mannequins.
Sure.
Like like they're not moving, you turn around, they've moved, and then you turn them into more of an ally.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff like, or I particularly remember in the final level, there's that generator with the 9 different, and you spend all game dealing with like 2 or 3 or 4, and you're like, well, I mean,
yeah, 9 fuses is a lot.
And then she's just, nope, let's keep moving.
Subversion of expectation is something that I was always repeating to myself. I had it written down. It was very important to me to do that a lot. To keep the player on their toes, to always not know what to expect. I wish I could take credit for the mannequin idea. It's brilliant. It's genius.
Yeah.
That's all lead game designer Chen. He's amazing. He's a wizard. And it worked so well that when we saw it working, we were like, we need to do more of this, as much of this as we can. And even though the mannequins don't show up throughout the whole game, the experience with them alone sets the tone for the rest of the game.
I did very much appreciate the mid-air high five.
Oh, amazing!
I mean, it's great.
Amazing.
It's fantastic.
Did you put sticky notes on them?
That's one of the few things that I didn't do. I got the sticky notes and I got to the end of the level and I saw the achievements. I was like,
yeah, we didn't tell people. We didn't make it obvious. That's the other thing, right? Yeah. We didn't make things obvious, like achievement-wise too. Like, we just wanted the game to keep surprising you. And there's a lot of humor in the game too, and that was really important for us. And like, by you discovering that you could do something that we did not prompt you to do, and to give you an achievement for doing so, it's just because here's the thing: we wanted to create a horror game. Yes, what was more important for us than creating a horror game was to keep it fun.
Right.
The game is supposed to be fun. We play games because it's fun, not because we have to.
Yeah.
And we that balance between horror and fun was really important to us.
I gotta ask, Alan Shore, the lighthouse keeper, Shore, whose idea was that? Who wants to take credit for that pun?
Sam.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm sure like the entire game is your project. Did you have a character that ended up being, like, from the initial genesis of the idea to the final execution? Did you have one that you felt best represented the original idea? Like, I mean, I guess that's a fancy way of saying which character. Did you have a favorite character?
Do I have a favorite character? That's tough because I've spilled so much of my own self into these characters. I mean, it's kind of weird to say Desmond just because he's the main character, but there's, like, Desmond went through so many changes too, and ultimately, there was a point in making this game where we thought, doing this whole mental illness thing is too hard, and we're not sure we're going to be able to do it right, and we're going to get in trouble, and we don't want to, tap into these overused tropes. We thought about maybe just making Desmond a detective and making these about murders around the city and just sort of changing it. And then we decided not to, and I'm happy we didn't. But there was a decision made at some point to make Desmond not cool, which just to make him like a dork. Like, he's not good with guns, he's not athletic, and just to make his personality sort of more everymanish. And then we, of course, hired Mick Lauer to do the voice, which was a problem because Mick is way cooler and had to really nerd it up to play Desmond. But he did a phenomenal job. And working with him was so much fun, too, because I had the absolute pleasure of directing all the voiceovers, too.
That's definitely something that I wanted to ask about.
Amazing.
So being the writer and then also being the person who worked directly with the voiceover artists, what was that process like? How was that different from writing the characters? Did things change based on people's performances?
Absolutely. From the get-go, I knew that I didn't want my voiceover artists to stray too far from their natural voice, because there's a sense of realism and groundedness that I wanted to keep. I didn't want this to be cartoony. I wanted these therapy sessions to sound realistic. I wanted there to be empathy and listening in the characters. I wanted their pain to be real. So I wanted my voice actors to be natural, for the voices that they were doing to be somewhat close to what they were, so they can focus on the acting. I wanted to give them a real chance to act and not just do voices.
Right.
We were doing this over COVID, over Zoom, or Discord, rather. I never met in person with any of my actors.
That makes sense, yeah.
And we hired people who could record from home, who had the means, and I read with them every take, opposite. And so two of my actors were never in the same room together. We just spliced it,
right,
so it seems that way, and it works. And it was because, I took my experience as an actor, and I acted my heart out with my voiceover actors in every take, so we would have stuff to bounce off of each other.
Right, exactly.
So I got to play every single one of my characters, too. And when doing that, I found new things.
Oh, sure. I mean, yeah.
And when I found new things, I got to, because we weren't, because I wasn't, we didn't hire both the actors, I didn't have them in a certain amount of time, I could afford to go and do rewrites and change things for the next time I work with the other actor. Things would be a little different. But also player feedback. When we released the demo of the game, which was pretty much the Homomart level, right? We watched people play, and we saw what they connected to, and the response to the therapy session, to Desmond and Virginia talking, seeing how people understood this, it was so intense, it was so great, and we could see immediately that people really connected to those therapy sessions, and we need more of that. That's what the focus needs to be on.
Yeah.
Maybe less on the action, more on the therapy. Let's see how much therapy, how much personal story you can throw in there, because people are relating. You asked me before what my favorite character was. I love all these characters dearly, but there's something about the authenticity in which Virginia is displayed in this game. The work that Haley put into the voice of Virginia. I mean, it's so real. And you can't help but feel compassion towards this character. I mean, she does such a wonderful job portraying Virginia that you immediately would hug this character if you could.
For sure.
Just to help her just suffer a little less. Yeah, man, it was a insane, crazy privilege to work with these actors. I mean, we got some really good actors, man. It was, what a privilege to work with this cast.
That's really cool. Well, So then let's talk about the other hat that you put on too, the writing for the songs. And working with the music. Do you consider yourself much of a songwriter, or how is that process?
I never thought at the beginning of this process that I'd be a published songwriter by the end of it. I've been writing lyrics for years. I mean, once I learned how to play the guitar, I was off to the races. I was writing my own stuff, but never seriously. And then, when you're tasked to write lyrics with an artist like the Living Tombstone, who he's huge. And then you really have to put some research into it too, because what Tombstone does is they do all this research, and they create beautiful music about a video game, and they don't just like play, an hour of a video game and go, I like this, I'm going to write a song about it. They know the lore of these stories inside and out. And so in order to write with Living Tombstone, I was already the writer of the game too. I knew the lore.
Yeah.
And it was an opportunity to clue the player into information that maybe we had to take out, right? Maybe one of those intentional, plot holes. I could fill those in with the story. I could continue telling the story through these songs. I could give you a different perspective. I could, on the level, you experience the level through the eyes of Desmond. Now you're going to hear the song through the eyes of the patient, and you're going to maybe understand why they were doing some of the things that they were doing. It was an amazing opportunity to create more lore.
Right.
So it was maybe one of my favorite parts of making this game was writing these songs.
When in the process was that? Was that later on, I assume?
It was it was all happening simultaneously.
Okay.
We went back and changed things like, months later, just before recording the songs, here and there. But it was really fun. It was really fun to work with artists like the Living Tombstone. I mean, immense talent. And what would happen is Tombstone would create a template of what the sound is going to sound like. I would then write lyrics to fit that template. And then we would just go kind of back and forth like that for weeks, months, and just kept getting better and better and better. And then we have to change. Then we'd lose a verse here, but we gain a bridge there. And then, I have a verse, but I'm missing a syllable for it to just be in there. And so we had to do all kinds of that stuff. It's crazy.
That sounds like a really good collaboration.
Oh my God, it was amazing. It was amazing.
That's really, really cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so then we've talked a lot about stuff that you really like. If there's one thing you could go back and change, I mean, outside of let's not have COVID, although it sounds like that was actually somewhat beneficial to the writing process.
It was. If I could change something, I would just give us. I would have given us more time, man. I mean, some of the beauty that ended up being in Sound Mind is because we had a time crunch. We had to get things done, and we did. So we did.
Yeah.
But to have a little more time for graphical optimization, for things to run a little more smoothly, for us to be able to adjust little things like voice to animation a little bit better, just so things go a little smoother. That's what I would have changed, and I would have given myself a little more time with my actors if I could.
Okay.
We could only afford to get our actors in for specific times, and because we're so small,
Sure.
there wasn't much of a budget for this thing. I mean, Modus Games came along and sort of saved our ass, and believed in what we were doing and helped us get through till the end. But if I could, I would spend a little more time with my actors, and if I could, I would be in the room with them. I would do exactly what I did, which was act with them all the way, if I couldn't get them both in the same room. Because ideally, how I would have done it is I would have gotten Mick, right, who played Desmond, and I would have gotten an actor, and I would have gotten Haley, and I would have put them in the same room, and I would put a couch, and I would put a chair, and I would set up microphones, and I would have them act out the scene.
Right, yeah.
Right? And until I get to a position where I can put two actors in a studio in mocap and have them act it out, that's how I would do it. Because even just for audio, I would still want the feeling for you to be able to really hear them walk around the room and really hear them listening to each other. That's
sure.
what I would do.
In-person acting is you can't beat it.
100%. That's what I would do.
Okay, that's really cool. We talked a bit about the humor.
Just to say this about writing Agent Rainbow.
Yeah.
So much fun.
Oh,
because he antagonizes you the whole time. So I love that character so much because it gave us a chance to not take ourselves too seriously and to just like jab the player, just poke at him and just make fun of everything. Make fun of ourselves, make fun of everything, make fun of 90s villains. I mean, he was so much fun to write.
And based on what you reveal about Captain Rainbow, he could technically end up being a Captain Planet villain of sorts, just because of what he represents.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, why not? Why not? It's so much fun to write. He was the most fun to write.
And I also have to say I appreciate his constant presence and the slow gaining of knowledge about like what his deal is. And I also appreciate that when he pops out at you, you never used a scare cord. From to my knowledge, like sometimes he's just there, but you never also like blast people with a jump scare.
No. I mean, the fact that it's something that we established right at the beginning is he's always there.
Yeah,
there's always somebody watching you, and no corner is safe to turn. And sometimes, and also subverting, right? So sometimes he's there to help you, sometimes he's not. Why? You learn that later. But that was, and it's the same thing with the mannequins, right? Is to show you something really scary and say, I don't know, maybe you could pet it. You try,
Well, I'm glad that works out with the cat at least.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
And
we had the utmost pleasure of having Tiana voice Tanya, and she did an amazing job. And I mean, everyone loved it. Everyone loves the cat.
Was that based on anybody's specific cat? Or?
It's all of us.
All of it.
I mean, we're all animal people. And so it was, we debated for a long time whether we wanted her to talk or not. We thought it might get weird and people would get weird with it.
You thought that would be the step too far for you?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But in the end, she turned out to be such a much needed character, who just like represents everything that is good about us and about our relationships to other people. And having her, the character of Tanya, have relationships with the patients that would come in. She'd be in the room with them, just small things like that. It just helped create such a living, breathing world.
It definitely increased that sense of like the office being like the safe space, but also the jumping off point. Yeah, so that I think that worked really, really well.
And what she meant to Desmond.
Yeah.
And what Desmond meant to her, I mean, I know that I did a good job when streamers cry at the end of the game.
For sure.
It's my favorite thing in the world.
Best thing.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
As much
Your
as
tears make me stronger.
As long as you earned them, though, right? I assume that with all of those documents, just a quick point that I wanted for my own clarification, all those redacted documents, I assume that you have the unredacted versions, and you just have to choose. Okay. All right. I figured.
Yeah, I have everything. I mean, it's like, one of the things about redacted information, that just pretty much shows you that there's more things into play than you're privy of, right? There's more characters that never saw the light of day. There's, there's who's writing, who's sending these, who's at the top, who is Meyer Pharmaceuticals, what's their deal?
That is definitely one of the things that I ended up appreciating, because like there's so many shows and games and whatever where everything feels so small. Like all the characters know each other. There's nobody outside. Even if there are things that are outside, it doesn't matter. But there is that sense of there's bigger stuff going on. Like there's other people in the town who matter. There's people who know each other. I really appreciated that some of these characters like know who the other people are. That just gave the sense that there was this community that you were interacting with.
Well, if we built a story that happens in a small town, and in a small town, people know each other.
Yeah. So that worked out.
You've got a guy who works at Homomart, but also writes for the local paper.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, that's most of my questions, to be honest with you. Is there anything that you really want people to know about the game that you feel is maybe not as well publicized?
I mean, I mean, not really. We're a small studio, and this game has done wonders for us, but we didn't expect everybody to know who we were right off the bat. And the response to this game has been so amazing. People seem to really connect with it, and it means the world to us. And we would be nowhere without our player base. And the fact that people were so willing to, so many people stepped into this game blind, that it amazed us.
I mean, I know that I did, for
right.
Sure. I mean, even on your recommendation.
And it's the best way to play it is
Yeah.
blind.
Mm-hmm.
And that people were trusting in a small little indie studio, for what the game is about, for the price point, for whatever, and we really, really appreciate it. We'd be nowhere without the community of players that delved into this, and that we will continue to grow as a company because of our player base. For the same reason that we released the demo when and how we released it on purpose, to watch people, to beta test it basically on the public.
Right, yeah.
And we got so much of it. And the things that we have learned already from the game being released, immeasurable.
What's like the number one thing that you were like, that is something that we have to hold on to or change? Or I mean, I know you talked about the therapy being a thing that you really wanted to lean into.
Because of the human connection element.
Yeah.
So I can't speak to the whole, there's so many moving parts in creating a video game, right? But from the writing aspect, the connection between player and character is the most important. And I have found so much. It was so interesting to see what people connect to. Every person has a different favorite character.
Sure.
In this, and they connect to different things, and some people hate certain songs, and those songs are some people's favorites. And to just really delve into, but why? I want to know why. Like, learning the psychology of my players, of Twitch streamers, has been just as interesting in like just writing a fictional character.
Sure.
So for me, the most important thing is learning what forms the connection between player and character, delve into that, do that again and better on the next project.
Okay. Yeah, and I know that you've talked about how there's seeds planted for future stuff. You have all these characters that you didn't use.
Yeah. I can't speak to when and where there will be a continuation to In Sound Mind. I hope there will be. There definitely can and should be. The story's there.
Yeah.
There's more to uncover. We already know where this is going.
Okay.
We've got it kind of planned out, but patience and grace.
And I for one certainly hope that you get the chance to explore it and
I do too.
And show us where it's all going.
One day.
Yeah. But yeah, I can't thank you enough for taking this time to talk about In Sound Mind. I, for one, had a really good time playing it, and I hope that more and more people get to experience it as time goes on and as you move on to other projects.
Thank you.
Yeah, wishing you nothing but the best for the future.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.